This time of year, nothing pairs better with too much food and alcohol than grim, macabre tales of murder and mayhem. This particular ghastly tale takes place on Christmas Day 1929 on a farm outside Germantown, North Carolina. Charlie Lawson's big Christmas surprise for his adoring family of 9 began with a trip into town. Sparing no expense, Charlie Lawson agreed to buy each and every member of his family an outfit of their choice before taking them over to a local photographer and having a family portrait taken. Quite a costly affair for a modest tobacco farmer. Just over a week later, it would be Christmas Day 1929. One might get the impression that Charlie was a good father who tried to bring his family the best Christmas possible, even on his meager income. But you'd be wrong. On the day itself, 17-year-old Marie Lawson had been busy in the kitchen preparing a fruitcake for after dinner that evening, while the younger sisters, 12-year-old Carrie and the 7-year-old Maybelle, wandered over to their aunt and uncle's house to celebrate the holidays and relieve some of the pressure on Charlie and his wife. Fanny Lawson, Charlie's spouse of 17 years, had been tending to her and Charlie's younger children, while Charlie and his oldest son, 16-year-old Arthur, nicknamed Buck, had planned a very special Christmas Day hunting trip, something of a yearly tradition for the pair. As Charlie and Arthur prepared to set out on their holiday hunting trip, they soon realized that they needed more shotgun shells if they were to have a successful hunt. Charlie sent Arthur up to the store to pick up some more ammo while he waited patiently in the tobacco barn. But when Charlie saw Carrie and Maybelle walking down the path, on their way back from their aunt and uncle's home, he shouldered his shotgun, aimed in the direction of his 2 young children, and pulled the trigger. There was simply no telling of the absolute terror and confusion experienced by those poor girls. The instant hit of agony as clusters of buckshot slammed into their bodies. The pure sense of chaos, seeing their own father walk slowly over to their bodies, expecting him to help as any good father should, only to have him smash the butt of his shotgun over and over again into their skulls, cracking them open in the driveway of their own home. Charlie then set off towards the family home, his trusty shotgun firmly in his grip. Fanny, who had been out on the front porch to investigate the gunfire, attempted to flee, but it was no good. There's no outrunning a shotgun blast. Hearing the gunshots from outside, the teenage Marie screamed bloody murder, trapped in a state of abject panic as her father racked the shotgun and gunned her down in the kitchen. The youngest children heard the commotion and, fearing for their lives, attempted to hide. Charlie quickly found them and brutally bludgeoned them to death with the butt of his shotgun. Even the newborn Mary Lou was shown no quarter. Charlie killed her without hesitation, leaving a horrific mess in the child's crib. Then, for some unknown reason, he then placed rocks under the heads of his dead wife and children and wandered off into the woods as if in a daze. Concerned neighbors of the Lawsons, initially walking over to wish them a Merry Christmas, heard the gunshots and hurried to check on them. Instead of the festive merriment they had come to expect, they stumbled onto a grisly tableau of blood, buckshot, and shattered bone. Before they could set out to find Charlie, they heard a single gunshot in the woods. Charlie had shot himself. By the time Arthur made it back from his trip into town, his entire family had been murdered. Folks at the town's general store had gotten word that something awful had happened, and someone in town offered to give Arthur a ride back to the family farm. When he reached his home, the police had already arrived and a crowd began to gather. In the woods, police found footprints indicating that Charlie had been pacing around a tree for some time before taking his own life. Next to his body were letters to both his parents. Some accounts reported that Charlie had placed stones over the eyes of his dead family members, as well as cushioning their heads with them. To this very day, no one is certain what exactly drove Charlie Lawson to slaughter his entire family, with the exception of young Arthur, before taking his own life. Some speculate that Lawson had been abusing Marie, and that she may well have been pregnant with an inbred child at the time of her death. Others have insisted that Charlie could not have had the capacity to commit the heinous acts that occurred on the family farm that Christmas Day, and that the entire thing had been staged to frame Charlie. A more credible explanation is that Charlie had developed a medical condition that affected his actions and caused him to experience a psychotic break. Perhaps he'd knocked a screw loose after suffering a head injury while digging a ditch on the farm, or as some reported, he had some kind of painful growth on his chest that had him in constant agony, and he decided to end it all and take his family with him. The killing attracted so much attention that an estimated 5,000 curiosity seekers attended the Lawson family funeral. They were all buried in a single large plot in the private Browder family cemetery just outside of Germantown. The house became a macabre tourist attraction after the murder-suicide, and Charlie's brother decided to open the house to the public, charging admission for tours of the property. Still on the counter sat the cake that Marie had been making. Even after the house had been closed, the cake made its rounds in traveling dime museums. Protective plastic had been used to cover the cake after several onlookers swiped some raisins. The cake toured for at least a decade before surviving family members buried the cake, along with the awful memories that came with it. Though the home was later demolished, the area still has enough spooky history to have inspired ghost sightings of the doomed Lawson children and of murderous Charlie Lawson. Unbelievably, the tragedy of the Lawson family didn't end in 1929. In 1945, James Arthur Lawson, the only child to survive the Christmas Day bloodshed, died at the age of 31 in a truck accident in Walnut Cove, North Carolina, quite near Germantown. He was buried in the same cemetery as the rest of his family, leaving behind 4 children of his own. When news of Arthur's death reached the local community, rumors of a family curse abounded. They insisted that Charlie had reached out to claim his son from beyond the grave. The murders also inspired the famed bluegrass duo the Stanley Brothers to pen a suitably morbid tune recounting the Lawson family's fate. The song includes the following lyrics. They say he killed his wife at first, while the little ones did cry. Please, Papa, won't you spare our lives? It is so hard to die. We're going back about 10 years for this one, but this was without a doubt one of the worst nights in my life, and it's one that all started on New Year's Eve. A few friends of mine all congregated in one of our parents' houses, doing some pre-drinking before we were due to head out to a New Year's party. We got toasty on a few tins, then ended up getting a taxi into the city center, where there was this massive student house in the Georgian Quarter where a load of locals and students alike had gathered to get bladdered and see in the new year. It was a decent enough party at first, like everyone seemed nice and friendly, and whoever lived there had to put in a great deal of effort to make people feel welcome, putting out snacks, ice for drinks, rigging up a big old speaker system to pump out the tunes, that sort of thing. Then at one point during the night, I noticed a few lads wandering around the party who looked like they didn't exactly belong there. It wasn't because of how they looked or dressed, like there was a big mix of people there from all different backgrounds, and it definitely made for a better atmosphere. The thing that got me was that while everyone was engaged in conversation or the like, drinking or dancing or whatever, these lads seemed to be just looking around, like they were just lost or looking for someone. I never really thought much of it at the time, though, like there were so many different people going in and out of the house all the time. I'd never been there before, hardly knew any of the people who actually lived in the house, so I wasn't really to know who should and shouldn't have been there, and it's not like I was about to start playing bouncer or security guard or whatever. Then, like an hour or so later, I'm in the kitchen trying to fish one of my cans of cider out of an already overstocked fridge, when someone walks up to me with this anxious look on their face. Hi, do you know that guy in the waterproof jacket that's been walking around? It was one of the students who actually lived in the house. Me? No, I thought you knew them. I reply, taking out a can and cracking it open. No, I thought they were with you. They reply, looking a bit more nervous as they're talking. There's a sort of awkward pause in the conversation before the person asks, Can you get them to leave? This was exactly the sort of thing I was trying to avoid. Like I said, I wasn't up for playing bouncer, and I was pretty bloody confused as to why they were asking me to do so. Mate, it's not my house. It's not my party. I'm not gonna go around telling people that they can't be here," I say before wading through the crowds to find my mates. A little while later, I realized I couldn't see any of the dodgy-looking guys hanging around the parties, so I just thought it had been dealt with by someone else. But then, the fella who'd asked me to kick them out comes up to me and actually thanks me for getting rid of them. Again, there's this moment of confusion where I'm like, "I didn't do anything, mate. They must have just left on their own." I really thought that that was the end of it, but boy was I wrong. I remember being pretty drunk by the time I nipped upstairs to use the third-floor toilet, one that had some windows looking into the street out the front of the building. So I'm standing there, draining the main vein, just sort of blankly staring out the window when I see this car pull up. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a car with a few lads piling out. I watch them go around to the boot, open it up, then start to pull out masks. I did a kind of double take like, what is this? They were pulling out ski masks, balaclavas, all sorts of stuff like that, followed by baseball bats, hockey sticks, knives, all kinds of blunt and sharp weapons. My brain was just slowed by the alcohol, I think, and I remember thinking, someone's in for a rough night, only realizing it was us that was in trouble when they started heading up the pathway towards the house, the same party house which had an open, unlocked door to allow pretty much anyone and everyone to just wander in and out at their leisure. The night was about to go very, very wrong for us. I don't think I even finished up my pee properly, at least I have no memory of doing so. The only thing I remember is rushing back to the room where my mates were chilling, just in time to hear a load of screaming and shouting coming from the ground floor. I just remember saying, "We need to get out of here, now." But my mates were so blitzed that they just sort of looked back at me in confusion like, "Why? What's up?" Not even bothering to move at first. I grabbed my jacket from off the floor, trying to tell them what I'd just seen, and what I just heard coming from downstairs, but I think I was so scared and drunk that it all just came out as a babble at first. I think maybe they just thought I was pulling their leg at first, that I was just playing some daft prank on them. I get it. The mood went from 0 to 100 really bloody fast, and I can totally understand their confusion. But then all of a sudden this lad appears in the doorway of the room we were occupying, wearing a gaiter over the bottom half of his face, with a baseball bat in his hand. Only then did they really realize how serious I'd been. The lad just instantly took a swing at my mate, who was closest to the door, and he only barely got out of the way in time. The lad then just starts shouting at us to stay seated, but to throw our phones into the middle of the room. There's a moment of hesitation, and the lad decides to let us know how serious he is by smashing a stereo near to him. I mean, he swung so hard with the baseball bat that he just obliterated that thing with one swing. That was all it took to get us to comply, and we all tossed our phones into a rough pile in the middle of the room. We thought he'd just grab them and leg it, but that wasn't enough for him. He starts asking for wallets, MP3 players, anything of any value, basically for us to empty our pockets. While this is going on, I can see all kinds of chaos unfolding in the hallway outside the room we're in. Lads are getting brave with the invaders only to get smacked in the face with brass knuckles or hockey sticks. Girls are getting pulled by their hair down the hall, falling over their high heels and getting carpet burn from getting dragged along the carpet. God knows what happened to them after they got their phones or wallets stolen. A few of us tossed our empty wallets next to our phones, but since only a few of us did, this masked guy thinks the rest of us are holding out on him. He doesn't smash an appliance this time, though. He edges forward and swings the bat down onto my mate's shoulders. Jesus Christ, the scream that came out of him after the impact was just unreal. Like I knew in an instant that he'd broken something, and he just falls down onto the carpet and starts grimacing in agony. The fella's all like, "I told you, wallets now." Maybe one or two more wallets get tossed into the pile, but there are still lads sat around who basically haven't thrown anything in the middle of the room, and the fella with the baseball bat has noticed this. He takes another swing at the lad whose shoulder he'd just smashed, bringing the bat down hard onto his side with this horrible, sickening thumping sound. It totally knocks the wind out of him, and if I didn't know any better, I'd have thought the gasping noises he were making were him properly dying. One of the guys blurts out that he's got nothing on him, that all his stuff is in the living room downstairs. I think he was one of the guys who actually lived in the house. This answer didn't satisfy the masked fella, who then smacks the downed, broken bones guy for a third or fourth time and gets him absolutely screaming in agony as yet another bone breaks. We're all pretty much begging him to stop at this point, but he just keeps smashing that baseball bat down onto our mate, barking at us to give him everything we've got or he'll just kill our mate. I think the only thing that saved his life was the appearance of another masked lad in the doorway who told him that they had to leave before the police showed up. And at that, the raiders were gone as quickly as they'd come. They'd ransacked the entire house, beaten up anyone who so much as put up an ounce of resistance. The whole place was just in shock. Girls were crying or wailing over the unconscious bodies of those lads they'd knocked out with bats or brass knuckles. It was honestly like walking through a war zone as I shakily plodded down the stairs, surveying the scene while my mates tried to tend to the guy who'd had the absolute life beaten out of him. Because they'd taken most people's phones, I think only a handful of people left at the party were able to actually get in touch with emergency services. I remember a few of them sort of going from room to room, trying to give the 999 operators a kind of damage report, telling them exactly how many injured people there were. There were police cars everywhere within the hour, and I think maybe about 4 ambulances turned up to treat the wounded, with another few ferrying the more seriously wounded of us off to the hospital for treatment, which obviously included our mate who'd had his bones broken by the lad with the baseball bat. Once he'd been taken away, there was no reason for us to be there anymore, so we just grabbed a load of ale from the fridge in the house and got walking home. I won't lie. We did take a few cans and bottles that didn't belong to us, but I think we just wanted to drink to forget at that stage. Like it was probably the single most terrifying, traumatizing thing I'd ever seen in my life up until that point. Like I know it's a massive cliche, but I heard our mates' screams for months afterwards. Sometimes when there were quieter moments in college or at night, I'd just hear them in my mind. Like not actually hear them, just remember them so vividly that it was like I could hear them, if that makes any sense. Those screams are a sound, along with the sound of bones breaking, that I sincerely hope I never have to hear, ever again. In late 2008, I came one night to find my mom sitting in the kitchen all alone and in floods of tears. When I asked her what was wrong, her answer made my jaw drop. My dad had left her. There was absolutely no indication that anything was wrong with their marriage or that he was remotely unhappy. But that afternoon, while I was out, he had apparently packed a few things into a suitcase, told her he was leaving, and just disappeared. I only mention this because it explains why my mom and little sister just didn't want to be in the house over Christmas and New Year. That kind of family-oriented time of year would have just been way too hard on them, so they basically buggered off to Mexico for a month to just decompress or whatever. Point being, I was all alone for Christmas and New Year's. Christmas Day sucked, and I realized that they were seriously right about not wanting to be alone in the house at that time of year. So for New Year's Eve, I decided to throw a little get-together for me and a load of my mates, hoping that a little party might take away some of the sadness I felt as a result of my dad leaving us. So on the night itself, it ends up being about 20 to 30 of us getting together in my parents' place, getting drunk, listening to music, playing Xbox, just a big hangout among some of the people I was closest to. It was a really good night to start off with, and it really did help take my mind off of things for a little while. We did the whole New Year's countdown thing, set off a few fireworks, generally having a brilliant little night together. But the drunker we all got, the messier things became, until it was just a medley of people throwing up, hooking up in the spare bedroom, or arguing amongst themselves. Two of the people who ended up fighting were my mate Chris and his girlfriend at the time, a girl named Katie. And what I could gather, Katie thought Chris had been flirting with a mutual friend of ours and had taken issue with it. Chris was insisting that they were just being friendly and it was nothing to worry about, but Katie was adamant that something was going on, that he was cheating on her, blah blah blah. You know how it is, teenage drama. Now I know Chris really did love her, so it wasn't like a stand-up argument. It was more like him begging her to see reason and to not go mad and dump him over some perceived bit of flirting. He swore he'd never do anything like that she was the only girl for him, how much he loved her, all this romantic, theatrical stuff that you might expect from two young lovers. It wasn't really anything in my business though, so me and the other party guests just sort of left them to it while we got on with trying to have fun. Then a little while later, I find Chris sitting in the back garden, swigging off a bottle of raw vodka on his own. I go up to him to ask him if he's okay, only to find that he's crying, rotten drunk, saying that Katie had dumped him and gone home. I tried to be a good friend and console him as best I could, saying that she probably was just drunk and over-emotional, how there was a good chance that they'd just get back together over the next couple of days when she'd realize she'd made a mistake. But he was insistent. She was gone for good and they wouldn't be getting back together. All I could do was get him on his feet and hug it out with him. The poor guy really was in one heck of a state, and I managed to convince him to hand over the vodka, drink some water, and then get some sleep in my bed so he could maybe sober up a wee bit before heading on home. He agrees. I tuck him in and then leave him to get some rest. About an hour or so later, the party is winding down and the remainder of us are just chilling in the TV room when someone goes off to use the toilet. They return like seconds later, saying someone's in the bathroom throwing up, then asking if they can go and take a pee in the back garden. Of course, I tell them no. I didn't want them peeing all over my mom's flower beds, and that I'll nip upstairs to see if I can get whoever is out of the bathroom. So I get the toilet upstairs, and I can hear someone gagging and retching on the other side of the locked door. My friend Julia joins me, a wee bit concerned, and starts trying to help me talk to the person who's locked themselves in the bathroom. It's sometime then that I notice that two doors are open, the first being my bedroom, the second being a little cupboard on the first floor landing. I check my bedroom and see that the bed is empty, so it's obviously Chris that's in the bathroom, puking his guts up because of all the vodka he drank. I shut the door to the bedroom, then go to close the door on the other room, which happened to be a little cupboard that my mom kept cleaning supplies in. My first thought was that Chris had opened up that door thinking it was the bathroom in his drunken haze, then legged it to the right bathroom in his desperation to puke. But I noticed something that, at first, I didn't really understand the significance of. The cleaning supplies that my mom usually kept all neat in a little plastic box were spilled all over the floor. Not like open fluids spilling out, they were just all out of the box like someone had been rooting through them. As I'm wondering why someone would do something like that, Julia calls out that the person who'd locked themselves in the bathroom, presumably Chris, had gone quiet all of a sudden, and that they weren't responding. That's when I put two and two together. Violent vomiting, cleaning supplies missing, deep drunken depression. Chris was trying to end his own life. I absolutely pegged it to the bathroom door and started trying to kick the door off the hinges. Julia screams in shock at what I'm doing, and people from the living room start piling out towards the bottom of the stairs in utter confusion. I've been really protective of the house all night, not wanting people smoking inside, not wanting people peeing anywhere they shouldn't, trying to stop spillages and all of that kind of stuff. Then there I was, booting down my own bathroom door. It was way too heavy to actually kick off the hinges, but I did manage to kick a hole in the wood paneling, and that's when I got a look inside. Chris was laying there, a bottle of bleach next to him, and there was like pink puke all over the cistern, the floors, and his clothes. It was pink because he drank the bleach and it had corroded or burned the inside of him so much that he had vomited up blood. We were distraught, terrified, almost sure that he was dead, but we were quick to call an ambulance. Chris had his stomach pumped and he survived, but it took a long time for him to be back to normal. Because he puked, the fumes had damaged his lungs or something. I'm not a doctor, so don't have a go if I get the details wrong. So he had trouble eating, drinking, and breathing for at least a month after that. 12 years later, and I've never forgotten that. and I'm pretty sure neither has he, because as far as I know, Chris never drank vodka again, because if the smell of it makes me think of that night, God knows what horrible memories it brings back to him. So this happened to me over 10 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. First, let me start the story by saying that at this point, the house next door to me had been vacant for almost a year. The elderly woman had passed away, and whoever now owned the house must have never got around to doing the necessary repairs to fix it. The old lady who used to live next door to me was a mean and miserable person. She always called the police on the neighbors, even though they would barely make any noise or do anything wrong at all. But it was always clear that she did love Christmas. She would hire people to hang up all of the holiday decorations on her front lawn and porch. Well, shortly after Christmas in my freshman year, she had passed away due to falling or an accident of that nature. Her kids from out of state came and cleaned out the entire house and left it vacant. As previously mentioned, they didn't sell it, repair it, or inhabit it. They just left the house to sit there and essentially rot. After they cleaned out the house, they left the curtains on the side of the house open, and if you looked out my bedroom window, you could see right into the house. It was semi-creepy knowing that the house was just so desolate and empty. Well, fast forward now to Christmas Eve of my sophomore year of high school. My brother and I took place in our yearly tradition of watching wrestling DVDs until we got tired. We both decided to go to bed shortly after 2 a.m. on Christmas morning. I shut off all my lights and got into bed and noticed a faint light coming through my blinds. So I got up and walked over to my window, and I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a ceiling light on in the house next door, and I couldn't explain it. I figured that there was no electricity at all, considering the house was vacant and nobody lived there for some time. I stared into the other house in confusion, and then the light shut off. Within 5 seconds or so, the light turned back on again, and that's when I saw it. A brief glimpse of a figure in the doorway of the house. It looked just like the old woman. At this point, I knew my mind was playing tricks on me. The lights went off for a second, and I stood there and stared into the darkness for several minutes trying to see anything, but it was just pitch blackness. Then a burst of light, and there she was again. The old woman was standing right in the window staring back at me. I fell over in fear and ran into my brother's room. I tried to wake him, but he was out cold. I slept on the floor in his room and stayed up all night trying to compute what I had just seen. For years, I told my friends this story and nobody ever believed me. Whenever friends would stay over, we would always look into the window and try and see something, but we never did. That was over 10 years ago, and that house has since been sold. But since it's been sold, the owners have sold it 3 times after moving in, so I wonder if I'm not the only one who has seen the lady wandering the halls. One thing is for sure, that is a Christmas present I will never forget. Christmas is a time of year to be happy, merry, and joyful, at least for most people. I love spreading cheer to family and friends on Christmas. My joyful mood usually translates to my coworkers as well. I work in customer service, which many people know can be a nightmare at Christmas time, so it helps to try and stay upbeat. Well, on this specific Christmas Eve, customers were doing some final Christmas shopping before Christmas Day. Right at the end of my shift, I cashed out a pretty normal-looking guy. I would say the average height range of like 5'7" and maybe 150 pounds. He had parted black hair, glasses, and was probably in his mid-40s. He was buying some fairly normal stuff and not really anything Christmas-related. The whole interaction was mostly friendly until the very end when I said something I now wish I didn't say. I ended our transaction by saying in my bubbly voice, "Thank you, sir, and have a happy holiday." He stopped and turned back to me and said, "What did you just say?" I responded nervously and semi-confused, "Have a happy holiday?" He stormed back to my register and screamed at the top of his lungs, "It's Merry Christmas!" I backed away in a slight panic and just said, "Okay, sir, I'm sorry." He walked away mumbling to himself, but I could tell he was furious by his recent actions. For a couple of minutes, I kept staring outside, and I could see him pacing in front of the store, still seemingly mumbling to himself. A few people actually came into the store and said that there was someone outside talking about Christmas and Jesus' birthday. I began to panic, thinking this guy was going to come into the store again or wait until I got out and try to follow me home or something. Well, luckily for me, my boyfriend worked at the same store, and he was driving us to my mom's house for a Christmas Eve party at the end of the night. We left shortly after 6, and at first I was relieved when I didn't see the man outside. We were almost to my boyfriend's car when we saw the man running after us from the side of the store. My boyfriend opened up the backseat door so I could hop in, and he stood there in front of the car. My boyfriend said in a stern voice, "Hey, is there a problem, man?" The man, still in a rage, said, "That lady has no respect for Jesus or Christmas, and she should be punished." My boyfriend, confused, told the man to back away and leave us alone, and the crazy man actually tried to jump past my boyfriend to get into the car to punish me, or whatever that meant. My boyfriend slammed the guy down to the ground and got into the car, and we drove off. Like fools, we decided on the drive not to call 911 because we didn't want to bother them on Christmas Eve, so we thought, and just wanted to forget the event. On December 26th, we did alert our store manager of the situation so we could call the police if the guy ever came back into the store. I still work at the store, and almost a year later, I have never seen that man again. I can say for certainty that I will never say Happy Holidays again. I love Christmas. It has always been a great day to spend with my family, and call me cheesy, but I really just enjoy the spirit of the day. My whole family and I had just finished a beautiful Christmas dinner, and most of my family went into the living room to wait for me to exchange presents. Christmas Day was when we did presents with the grandparents and cousins. I was in the kitchen washing dishes with my brother Jake and cousin Teresa. While I was washing dishes, I looked out the window and thought I noticed somebody out by my shed. I didn't really let it bother me because I figured it was some kind of shadow from the tree. After a few more minutes of washing, I noticed the figure again, and this time I was definitely sure that it was a man. I told my brother and cousin to look out the window, but don't make it obvious. They noticed it as well. We all talked quietly among ourselves, trying to figure out what we should do. Our thought was that this man was technically trespassing in my backyard, so we decided to call the police. They told us that they would send somebody out to take a look right away. Trying not to panic and hoping everything stayed how it was until the police showed up was not easy. The kids started to get restless as well as the grandparents were wondering what was the holdup. My parents knew something wasn't right, but they did a really great job of keeping everybody in the living room. After a couple of minutes, we noticed the man starting to approach my house, and he wasn't alone. There were 3 more men that came out from behind the shed. They started to surround my house. Confused and terrified, we tried to remain calm. What happened next was nothing shy of a Christmas miracle. The flashing lights appeared, and we heard a minor altercation outside of the house. The officers were able to catch one of the men, while the other 3 fled. While somehow not bringing a lot of attention to my family inside, I spoke with the cop outside and gave my statement. Well, turns out my cousin Teresa had broken up with her boyfriend several months before Christmas, and the man they detained was, in fact, her ex-boyfriend. Teresa had started seeing somebody new, and this man figured the new boyfriend would be at the house for the Christmas party. Her ex and his friends clearly planned on attacking him, or at least putting a good scare into him, so I thought. Until the officer informed us that my cousin's ex was equipped with a knife and brass knuckles in his back pocket. Luckily, nobody got hurt, and I'm not actually sure what kind of trouble he got into for this. The rest of the night went smooth, and we opened presents, but I had an uneasy feeling for the rest of the night that the other men might return and try to finish the plan they started. Being the father of two small children, Christmas Eve is usually a very early night for my family because the kids wake me up around 6 a.m. for Santa's presents. At about 10 p.m., I got into bed with my wife and started to fall asleep. Shortly after this, I was jolted awake by our doorbell. I jumped out of bed and ran down the stairs, more angry than anything else that some idiot rang my doorbell on Christmas Eve after 11 p.m. with two small children asleep. Without even thinking, I opened the door and said, "What do you want?" It was an old man with a dirty black beard. He was wearing a red jacket and red sweatpants. His face was filthy. He said in a slow and haunting voice, "Please, let old Chris Kringle come inside and get warm." I slammed the door in his face and said through the door, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." The man was quiet for a moment, and then knocked on the door slowly. I yelled one more time, trying not to wake my kids. "Do you want to be arrested?" He then started to bang on my door vigorously and relentlessly. My wife then ran down the stairs, who I might add is a third-degree black belt, and asked what was going on. I told her to call the police and then make sure the kids were all right. The man must have heard me on the phone because he stopped knocking. I could hear him muffled through the door say, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." And then he laughed as he walked away. After feeling a slight moment of relief thinking this ordeal was over, I decided to wait at the front door until the police showed up. A cop showed up several minutes later, and I explained the situation to him. He stated that he had no other calls or similar reports like this tonight, and that's when we heard my wife scream from the kids' room. The police officer headed up the stairs first, with me right behind him. The man was trying to break into the window where my daughters slept. The cop immediately tased and arrested the man, who just kept saying, "Don't worry, I'm Santa Claus," over and over again. The situation was never really explained to me. Apparently he was just a homeless man who was wandering around. The cops said that he may have been possibly on something. Either way, I never sleep quite right on Christmas anymore. If you enjoyed these stories animated by the awesome Mort, but you want to hear more, be sure to head over to my channel, Let's Read, to hear the rest of these spooky tales.